She thought the West would give her freedom. She never imagined it would give her a choice between survival and surrender. Marion Hale fled Boston's suffocating parlors for Colorado's wild frontier, swearing she'd never need rescuing, especially not by some rough-handed cowboy. But when her borrowed mare bolted and left her stranded in mountain lion country, the man who found her didn't just save her life. He challenged everything she believed about independence, adventure, and the one thing she'd sworn never to want: love. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Marion's journey travels. The stagecoach lurched over another rut in the primitive excuse for a road, and Marion Hale pressed her gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself. Outside, the Colorado Territory unfolded in shades of gold and green that no Boston parlor painting had ever captured. Endless plains giving way to foothills, and beyond them, the Rocky Mountains rising like the jagged spine of some sleeping giant. "First time out west, miss?" The elderly gentleman across from her adjusted his spectacles, his weathered face creasing with knowing amusement. "Yes." Marion couldn't suppress her smile. "And I intend to make the most of every moment. Pine Ridge ain't Boston, that's for certain." He chuckled, then sobered. "You got family there?" "No, I have a teaching position." His eyebrows rose. "Traveling alone?" Marion lifted her chin slightly. "I'm 22 years old and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." The man's expression softened into something between admiration and concern. "Yes, ma'am, I expect you are. Well, the territory's got its own ways. Some of them take getting used to." Marion turned back to the window, watching the landscape transform. That was precisely what she wanted. Something different, something real. Boston had been all crystal chandeliers and calculated conversations, every word measured, every action prescribed. Her mother's social circle had nearly crushed her spirit with their endless discussions of suitable marriages and proper behavior. "Marion, dear, you're 22. The Morton boy is quite interested, and his family's connections. A woman of your age should be thinking of her future. Really, such independent notions are most unbecoming." She'd endured 3 years of it after finishing school. 3 years of watching her mother parade eligible backers through their drawing room like prized horses at auction. 3 years of feeling her world shrink smaller and smaller until she could barely breathe. Then had come the advertisement in the Boston Globe. Teacher wanted for frontier school, Pine Ridge, Colorado Territory, housing provided. Apply to Mrs. Sarah Mitchell. Marion had written that very evening. 2 months later, she'd boarded a train west, leaving behind a tearful mother, a disapproving father, and the ghost of the life she'd narrowly escaped. The stagecoach created a final rise, and there it was, Pine Ridge. The town nestled in a valley where pine-covered slopes met a wide meadow, a silver thread of river cutting through its heart. Wooden buildings lined a single main street, their false fronts proud against the mountain backdrop. It was rough, unfinished, utterly unlike anything she'd known. It was perfect. "Pine Ridge," the driver called. "End of the line." Marion gathered her carpetbag and hat box as the coach rolled to a stop before a 2-story building with a sign reading Mitchell's Boarding House. Before the driver could climb down to assist her, she'd opened the door herself and stepped into the dusty street. The mountain air hit her like a revelation, crisp and clean, carrying scents of pine and sage, and something wild she couldn't name. She inhaled deeply, feeling her lungs expand, her shoulders straighten. "Miss Hale?" A woman's voice drew her attention. A sturdy, gray-haired lady in a practical calico dress approached with a warm smile. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Welcome to Pine Ridge." "Mrs. Mitchell." Marion returned the smile, accepting the woman's firm handshake. "Thank you so much for this opportunity." "Oh, honey, we're the grateful ones. We haven't had a proper teacher in over a year. The children have been running half wild." Sarah's eyes sparkled with humor. "Though I suppose some would say that's just the nature of frontier living. Come on, let me show you to your room. Then we'll get you settled and I'll introduce you around town." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if sparse by Boston standards. Marion's room on the second floor held a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk, and a window overlooking the main street. But that window framed a view of mountains that made her chest ache with something between longing and joy. "It's wonderful," she said honestly. Sarah beamed. I'm glad you think so. Some of the girls from back east, they take one look and burst into tears. But you've got spirit in your eyes. I can see that. Over supper that evening, a hearty meal of venison stew and fresh bread that put Boston's elaborate dinners to shame, Sarah filled Marian in on Pine Ridge's essentials. The school's just down the street, simple building, one room, but sound enough. You'll have about 20 students, ages 5 to 15. Some of the ranch children only come when their folks can spare them, so attendance varies. Sarah passed the butter. Most families are good people, ranchers, shopkeepers, a few miners up in the hills. We've got a doctor, a sheriff, and 3 churches, though I'll warn you they compete fierce for congregants. Marian laughed. It sounds like a proper community. We try. Sarah's expression turned more serious. It's not an easy life out here, Miss Hale. The winters are hard, supplies can be scarce, and folks depend on each other in ways city people don't always understand. But if you're willing to work hard and keep an open mind, you'll find a good home here. I intend to do exactly that. The next day, Marian met her students for the first time. They filed into the schoolhouse in a ragtag parade, boys in worn dungarees, girls in faded calico, all of them watching her with curious, slightly suspicious eyes. Good morning, she said, facing them from the teacher's desk. My name is Miss Hale. I've come from Boston to be your teacher. Boston? A freckled boy in the front row wrinkled his nose. That's back east. It is indeed, and I'm very glad to be here instead. She smiled. Now why don't we go around and you can all tell me your names? There was Tommy Brennan, the freckled boy, whose father owned the general store. Lucy and Emma Pritchard, 2 shy sisters from a nearby ranch. James Holbrook, whose father was the blacksmith. The names and faces came one after another, and Marian committed each one to memory. And I'm Grace Mitchell, the last girl said, a bright-eyed child of about 10. Mrs. Mitchell's my aunt. Pa runs the livery stable. It's lovely to meet all of you, Marian said. Now I know you've been without a teacher for some time, so we're going to start by seeing where everyone is with their reading and arithmetic. But I promise, learning is meant to be an adventure, not a chore. That first week passed in a blur of lessons and adjustments. Marian quickly discovered that her students' education had indeed been sporadic at best. Some of the older children could barely read, while a few of the younger ones were surprisingly advanced. She'd have to tailor her approach to each level, a challenge, but one she relished. The townspeople welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth. The shopkeepers were friendly, eager for news from the east. The ranch wives were more reserved, watching her with careful eyes, clearly wondering if this Boston lady would last through her first winter. The miners who came to town on weekends tipped their hats and kept their distance. By her second week, Marian felt she was beginning to find her footing. The school was taking shape under her guidance. She'd established routines, started a lending library with books from Sarah's collection, and even convinced Tommy Brennan that arithmetic wasn't torture. Then came Thursday afternoon, and Sarah's offer that would change everything. My niece is out at the Callahan Ranch for a visit, Sarah said over breakfast. They've got a lovely mare, gentle as a lamb. Mrs. Callahan suggested you might like to borrow her for a ride. Get out and see some of the country around here. Marian's heart leaped. She'd seen riders passing through town all week, moving with easy grace, and longed to explore beyond Pine Ridge's single street. Oh, I'd love that. I used to ride in Boston, though I'm sure these trails are quite different. Sarah hesitated. You'll need to be careful, stay close to town, and don't wander into the high country alone. There's mountain lions up there, and a person who doesn't know the land can get turned around quick. I'll be careful, I promise. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of day that made Marian's spirit soar. She borrowed one of Sarah's split skirts, more practical than her Boston riding habit, and made her way to the livery stable where the Callahan's mare waited. The horse was indeed gentle, a dappled gray with kind eyes and a smooth gait. Grace's father saddled her and gave Marian basic directions. Follow the river trail east for about 2 miles. There's a nice meadow with wildflowers. Turn back when you see the big lightning-struck pine. Can't miss it. Marian set off with a sense of freedom she'd never known. The mare moved easily beneath her, following the clear trail beside the rushing river. Aspens trembled in the breeze, their leaves catching the light like scattered coins. Birds called from the pines. The only sounds were the horse's hooves, the water's song, and her own delighted breathing. The meadow was exactly as promised, a sweep of wildflowers in purple, yellow, and white, stretching toward the foothills. Marian dismounted, looping the reins loosely over a low branch, and wandered among the blooms. Columbines, she thought, an Indian paintbrush, and others she couldn't name. She knelt to examine a particularly beautiful cluster, pulling a small notebook from her pocket to sketch them. She'd add them to the nature studies she was planning for her students. A sharp crack echoed across the meadow. The mare's head jerked up, her ears flattened. Another crack, louder this time. A gunshot? The horse screamed and bolted, ripping the reins free and thundering back toward the trail. Marian lunged after her, shouting, but the mare was already disappearing into the trees. Her stomach dropped. She stood alone in the meadow, the silence suddenly oppressive. The river trail lay 100 yards away through dense brush. Pine Ridge was at least 2 miles back, maybe more. She'd been so absorbed in the flowers that she'd wandered farther than intended, and now she couldn't even see the lightning-struck pine that was supposed to mark her turning point. Don't panic, she told herself firmly. You're intelligent and capable. You'll simply walk back. But which way was back exactly? In her wandering, she'd lost her precise orientation. The river trail had been to the north, or was it northeast? The mountains rose to the west, but everything looked similar from ground level. She took a breath and started walking in what felt like the right direction, pushing through scrub oak and scattered pines. The underbrush caught at her borrowed skirt. Branches scratched her hands. After 20 minutes, she still hadn't found the trail. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountain peaks. Real fear flickered in her chest now. She'd promised Sarah she'd be back before supper. If she wasn't, search parties would go out. Resources would be wasted, all because she'd been careless. A low growl froze her in place. Marian turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. 30 feet away, on a rocky outcrop, a tawny shape lay stretched in the fading sunlight. Golden eyes fixed on her with predatory interest. Mountain lion. There's mountain lions up there. Sarah's warning echoed in her head. What did one do when faced with a mountain lion? Run? No, that triggered chase instincts. Make noise? Back away slowly? She couldn't remember, couldn't think past the terror clogging her throat. The cat rose in one fluid motion, muscles rippling under tawny hide. Marian stumbled backward, catching her heel on a root. She went down hard, pain shooting through her ankle. The mountain lion tensed, preparing to spring. A sharp whistle cut the air. The cat's head snapped around. Another whistle, closer, and the thunder of approaching hooves. A rider burst through the trees on a chestnut horse, moving fast. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, positioned his horse between Marian and the mountain lion. "Get up!" His voice was commanding, urgent. "Behind me, now!" Marian scrambled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and moved behind the chestnut horse. The rider sat easy in the saddle despite the tension crackling through the moment, his attention fixed on the mountain lion. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard with practiced smoothness. The cat hissed, showing teeth. The man fired once, not at the cat, but into the ground near its paws. Dirt exploded. The mountain lion snarled and leaped back, then turned and vanished into the rocks as if it had never been. Silence fell, broken only by the chestnut horse's breathing and Marian's ragged gasps. The man lowered his rifle and turned in the saddle to look at her. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered features, dark hair curling over his collar, and the kind of steady, assessing gaze that seemed to take in everything at once. "You hurt?" His voice was calmer now, but still held that edge of command. I don't think so. My ankle twisted, but..." She couldn't seem to catch her breath properly. "That was a mountain lion." "Yes, ma'am." Big Tom. He swung down from his saddle with easy grace, still holding the rifle loosely in one hand. "You alone out here?" "My horse bolted. There was a gunshot, and she..." Marian pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. "I was in the meadow, looking at flowers." Something flickered across his face, not quite amusement, but close. "And you wandered into mountain lion country to pick wildflowers." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I didn't know. The livery manager said to follow the river trail to the meadow. He didn't mention, the meadow's safe enough. You kept going past it, into the foothills." He glanced at the sun, now kissing the mountain peaks. "Been out here long?" "A few hours." She straightened her shoulders, fighting the urge to cry from relief and residual fear and embarrassment. I'm sorry to have troubled you. If you could point me toward Pine Ridge, I'll make my way back. Now he did smile, a small, wry curve of his mouth. In the dark? With a twisted ankle and no horse? I don't think so, ma'am. Come on. He moved toward her, and she instinctively stepped back. His eyebrows rose. Easy. I'm just going to check that ankle before you try putting weight on it. He propped his rifle against a nearby tree and knelt in front of her. May I? There was something courteous in the question despite his earlier commanding tone. Marion nodded mutely. His hands were gentle but efficient as he examined her ankle through her boot. Doesn't feel broken. Can you stand on it? She tested it carefully. Pain flared, but it held her weight. Yes. Good. He straightened, and she realized how tall he was, easily 6 feet with the lean strength of someone who worked hard for a living. You're the new schoolteacher, Miss Hale. It wasn't a question. How did you? Small town. Word travels. He retrieved his rifle and gestured toward his horse. Can you ride? I'll take you back. Pride warred with practicality. Pride lost. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Rollins. Caleb Rollins. The name rang a bell. Sarah had mentioned the Rollins Ranch, one of the largest spreads in the valley, she'd said. Cattle and horses. Good people. Caleb swung into the saddle, then extended his hand. Put your foot on mine and I'll pull you up. Marion hesitated only a moment before complying. His grip was sure and strong, and in one smooth motion she was seated behind him on the chestnut horse. The animal shifted, adjusting to the double load, but stood steady. Hold on, Caleb said. There was no polite way to manage it. Marion slipped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his cotton shirt. He smelled of leather and sage and wood smoke. Not unpleasant, just different from anything she'd known in Boston's perfumed parlors. They started down through the foothills at an easy walk. Now that the immediate danger had passed, Marion's mind began cataloging details. The way Caleb sat his horse, relaxed but alert. The rifle now secured across his back. The confidence in every movement suggesting a man completely at home in this wild country. Your mare made it back to town about an hour ago, he said without turning. Folks were getting ready to form a search party when I rode through. I volunteered to check the usual places people get turned around. Shame burned through her. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. No one means to cause trouble. His tone was matter-of-fact rather than critical. But trouble finds people out here all the same, especially folks who don't know the country. That gunshot that spooked your horse, probably someone hunting. They wouldn't have known you were out here. The livery manager told me where to go. The meadow's fine. You should have turned back there. The lightning-struck pine marks the safe boundary. I never saw a lightning-struck pine. Because you went past it, chasing flowers. Now there was definitely amusement in his voice. Miss Hale, exactly how much riding have you done? I rode regularly in Boston, in Hyde Park. He was quiet for a moment. That's a city park, with groomed paths. Yes? This isn't that. He guided the chestnut around a fallen log with easy pressure from his knees. Out here, the country doesn't care how educated you are or how well you ride on a groomed path. It'll kill you just as dead if you're careless. The words stung because they were true. I understand. Do you? He glanced back at her and his eyes were serious. I'm not trying to scare you, Miss Hale, but folks come west expecting adventure without understanding that adventure and danger are pretty much the same thing out here. The mountains, the weather, the animals, they're all beautiful and they're all deadly if you don't respect them. I do respect them, Marion said quietly. I wanted to see them, to experience something real. Something in her voice must have reached him, because his tone softened slightly. Nothing wrong with that. Just learn the rules first. Talk to folks who know the country. Don't go wandering alone until you understand what you're doing. They rode in silence for a while, and Marion found herself noticing details she'd been too frightened to observe earlier, the way the fading light gilded the pine needles, the coolness of the evening air carrying the scent of coming night, the sure-footed movement of Caleb's horse navigating terrain that would have terrified her. He was right, of course. She'd been foolish. The West wasn't Boston, and treating it like some grand adventure without proper preparation had nearly gotten her killed. But even as shame warmed her cheeks, a stubborn part of her whispered that she'd come here to be free, not to be coddled and protected. She'd fled one cage only to— "Don't take it personally," Caleb said, surprising her. "What I said. Every newcomer makes mistakes. Some of us who were born here still make them. I just figure it's better to learn from a scolding than from a mountain lion." Despite everything, Marion felt a smile tugging at her lips. "That's a fair point. Besides, Sarah would skin me alive if I brought you back damaged. She's been talking about you for weeks, the educated Boston teacher come to civilize our wild children." "I don't intend to civilize anyone. I'm here to teach." Same thing to most folks. But there was warmth in his voice now, that earlier edge gone. "How are you finding Pine Ridge so far? Apart from the wildlife, I mean." "I love it." The words came without thought. The town, the students, the mountains, all of it. "I know I made a mistake today, but that doesn't change how I feel. Boston was suffocating. This is breathing." She felt rather than saw him nod. "I've been east a few times. Couldn't stand it. Too many people, too many rules about nothing important." Exactly. Relief flooded through her that someone understood. Everything there was about appearances and expectations. What you wore, what you said, who you married. She cut herself off, but Caleb finished the thought. "And they tried to marry you off to someone you didn't want." It wasn't a question. Marion stiffened. "That's rather presumptuous. Is it wrong?" She couldn't lie. Not when he'd saved her life and was being so patient with her foolishness. "No, it's not wrong. My mother spent 3 years parading eligible men through our drawing room. I felt like livestock at auction." "So you ran." "I chose a different life." "Out here, those are the same thing." But his tone held approval, not judgment. "Takes courage to walk away from comfort, even if you're walking towards something better." The lights of Pine Ridge appeared ahead, golden windows in the gathering darkness. Marion felt an odd pang of disappointment that the ride was ending. Despite the circumstances and her embarrassment, there had been something peaceful about it. Something honest. Caleb guided his horse down the main street, where several people immediately hurried toward them with exclamations of relief. Sarah reached them first, her face tight with worry. "Oh, thank heavens, Marion, we were so worried." "I'm fine, Sarah, I'm so sorry." Marion accepted Caleb's help dismounting, wincing as weight hit her twisted ankle. "I was foolish and wandered farther than intended. Mr. Rollins found me." "Found her facing down a mountain lion in the foothills," Caleb added, swinging down from his saddle. "Tom I've been tracking for a week. She's lucky I was close enough to hear her horse bolt." A murmur went through the gathered crowd. Sarah's eyes widened. "A mountain lion! Marion—" Mr. Rollins scared it off. Marion met his gaze, trying to convey gratitude that went beyond words. "He saved my life. I'm deeply grateful." Caleb's expression remained neutral, but something warm flickered in his eyes. "Just glad I was there to help. You should rest that ankle, Miss Hale, and maybe stick to the schoolhouse for your next adventure." He tipped his hat to Sarah, nodded to the gathered townspeople, and swung back into his saddle. A moment later, he disappeared down the street, leaving Marion standing in the lamplight with Sarah's arm around her shoulders and a dozen concerned faces asking questions. But as Sarah led her back to the boarding house, and as she soaked her ankle and accepted tea and sympathy, Marion's mind kept returning to the ride back, to the feeling of solid warmth and competence, to Caleb's matter-of-fact assessment of her mistakes, followed by that unexpected understanding, to the way he'd called leaving Boston courage rather than cowardice. Adventure and danger are pretty much the same thing out here. She should be properly chastened. She should be embarrassed. She should probably be having hysterics given what had almost happened. Instead, she found herself hoping she'd see Caleb Rollins again. Not to be rescued. She'd had quite enough of that for one lifetime. But perhaps to learn what he'd meant about understanding the country, about earning the right to experience its beauty without being reckless. Perhaps to prove that a Boston schoolteacher could learn to be more than decorative and helpless in this wild new world she'd chosen. Sarah tucked a blanket around her on the boarding house sofa, clucking with concern. You rest now. No more adventuring until that ankle heals, promise me. Marian promised. But as she sat in the lamplight, listening to the wind in the pines outside and remembering the weight of a rifle that had stood between her and death, she thought that maybe, just maybe, the adventure she'd come west seeking was going to be more complicated, dangerous, and wonderful than she'd ever imagined. And Caleb Rollins, with his steady hands and understanding eyes and no-nonsense wisdom, had just become part of it whether either of them intended it or not. The schoolhouse bell rang clear in the morning air, calling children from across Pine Ridge and the surrounding ranches. Marian stood at the doorway, greeting each student as they arrived, but her mind kept drifting to the week that had passed since her disastrous flower-picking expedition. Her ankle had healed quickly, the swelling gone within days. Her pride had taken longer to recover. She'd endured well-meaning lectures from half the town about the dangers of wandering alone, sympathetic looks from the ranch wives who clearly thought she'd learned her lesson about frontier life, and countless retellings of her near-death encounter that grew more dramatic with each version. What she hadn't endured was another encounter with Caleb Rollins. She told herself she wasn't disappointed. Why would she be? The man had done his duty and moved on with his life. She had her teaching, her students, her new beginning. That was enough. It had to be enough. Miss Hale? Tommy Brennan waved a hand in front of her face. Are we starting lessons or not? Marian blinked, realizing she'd been staring down the empty street. Again. Of course. Everyone take your seats, please. She was midway through a geography lesson, pointing out the Rocky Mountains on the large map she'd hung at the front of the room, when the schoolhouse door creaked open. Every head turned. Caleb Rollins stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Morning, Miss Hale. Sorry to interrupt. Marian's heart did something complicated in her chest. Mr. Rollins? Good morning. Class, this is Mr. Caleb Rollins. He runs the Rollins Ranch. My pa says the Rollins spread is the biggest in the valley, Tommy announced proudly. 3,000 acres. Closer to 4 now, Caleb said, his discomfort easing slightly at the familiar topic. We just bought the Henderson place. His attention returned to Marian. Could I speak with you a moment? Outside. 20 pairs of curious eyes swiveled between their teacher and the rancher. Marian felt heat creeping up her neck but kept her voice steady. Of course. Lucy Pritchard, would you please continue reading from page 47? I'll be right back. She followed Caleb outside into the spring sunshine, acutely aware of the faces pressed against the schoolhouse windows. He led her a few yards away, out of immediate earshot, before turning to face her. I wanted to check on you, he said. Make sure you were recovering all right. I'm perfectly well, thank you. The ankle healed quickly. She studied his face, trying to read the expression there. Was that all? He shifted his weight, turning his hat in his hands. Also wanted to apologize if I was too harsh with you last week. Sarah said I scolded you pretty good, and that maybe I could have been gentler about it. Sarah talks too much. A smile ghosted across his face. That's the truth. But was she right? Marian considered lying, then decided against it. You weren't gentle, no. But you weren't wrong either. I was careless and unprepared. I needed to hear it. Still could have said it better. Perhaps. She tilted her head, watching him. But out here, where adventure and danger are the same thing, maybe gentle isn't always useful. He caught the echo of his own words, and his smile widened. You listen well. I'm a teacher. It's my job. Is it also your job to be stubborn? That comes naturally. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his weathered face. I believe it. Look, Miss Hale, I came here with a proposition. Her eyebrows rose. Not that kind, he said quickly, color touching his cheeks. A teaching proposition. You said you wanted to experience the country, learn about it. I thought maybe I could help with that. Help how? I could show you around, the safe places, the dangerous ones, how to tell the difference, teach you to read the land, understand the weather, recognize trouble before it finds you. He met her gaze steadily. That way, next time you want to pick flowers, you'll know how to do it without nearly getting eaten. Marian's first instinct was to refuse. She'd come west to escape being managed and controlled. She didn't need another man telling her what to do, even if he wrapped it in helpful guidance. But then she remembered the terror of facing that mountain lion, The sick certainty that she was going to die because she didn't know enough to save herself. The humiliation of needing rescue because she'd been too proud to admit her ignorance. "Why would you do this?" she asked carefully. Caleb was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words. "Because the West is hard enough without people dying from simple ignorance. Because Sarah thinks you're good for this town, and I trust her judgment. And because—" He paused, then continued more quietly. "Because you reminded me of my sister. She had that same hunger in her eyes. That need to be more than what people expected." "Had?" "She died 6 years ago. Fever." His expression closed slightly, the way it had when discussing difficult terrain. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated someone teaching these kids that there's a bigger world beyond Pine Ridge." Marion's throat tightened. "I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded once, accepting the sympathy without dwelling on it. "So what do you say? I could come by Saturdays, take you riding, show you the country properly." Every instinct screamed caution. Getting close to anyone, especially a man, meant risking the independence she'd fought so hard to claim. But another part of her, the part that had driven her west in the first place, recognized an opportunity too valuable to refuse. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to work you harder than you expect." But his eyes held warmth. "This Saturday, then? Meet me at the livery, 8 o'clock. Wear practical clothes and bring water." "I'll be there." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. "Better get back to your students before they stage a rebellion." Marion glanced at the schoolhouse, where faces quickly disappeared from the windows. "Too late for that, I think." Caleb's laugh followed her as she walked back inside, and she found herself smiling despite knowing she'd be fielding questions for the rest of the day. She was right. The moment she closed the door, hands shot up across the room. "Is Mr. Rollins your beau, Miss Hale? Are you getting married?" "My ma says all the ladies in town have tried to catch him, but he's too particular." "That's quite enough," Marion said firmly, though her cheeks burned. "Mr. Rollins is simply being helpful to a newcomer. Now, who can tell me what Lucy just read about the Mississippi River?" The question subsided, but the speculative looks didn't. Marion resigned herself to being the subject of gossip and returned to the lesson, trying not to think about Saturday. The week crawled by with maddening slowness. Marion threw herself into teaching, developing new lesson plans, and working individually with students who needed extra help. In the evenings, she helped Sarah with the boarding house or read from Sarah's collection of books about the Colorado Territory, determined to learn everything she could before her next outing. "You're awfully focused on that geology text," Sarah observed Thursday evening, watching Marion make notes. "Most folks find rock formations dull as dishwater." "I find them fascinating. Did you know there's an entire layer of limestone that—" Marion caught Sarah's knowing smile. "What?" "Nothing at all. Just nice to see someone taking their education seriously." You're matchmaking. I'm observing. There's a difference." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "Though I will say Caleb Rollins is a good man, honest, hardworking, treats his ranch hands fair. His mother was my dearest friend before she passed. The family's got integrity." "I'm sure they do, but I'm not looking for a husband, Sarah. I came here to teach." "Can a person do both?" "Not if it means giving up everything else." Marion set down her pencil. "Every married woman I've known has disappeared into her husband's life. His house, his name, his decisions. I won't do that." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That's how it is some places, I suppose. But out here, things are different. Women have to be strong just to survive. Most men learn to respect that." She stood collecting the teacups. "Still, you're young yet. No need to decide anything now. Just don't close yourself off to possibilities, dear. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones we don't plan." Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marion dressed in the split skirt Sarah had loaned her, braided her hair securely, and filled a canteen with water. Her stomach fluttered with nerves and anticipation as she walked to the livery stable. Caleb was already there, saddling 2 horses, his chestnut and a smaller bay mare. He looked up as she approached, his assessment quick and approving. "Good. You dress sensibly." He gestured to the bay. "This is Juniper. She's steady and smart. You'll ride her today." Marion approached the mare, letting her sniff her hand before stroking the velvet nose. "Hello, Juniper. We're going to be friends, aren't we? She'll treat you right if you treat her right. Caleb checked the saddle girth one more time. Ready? Where are we going? Up to Eagle Point. It's a good overview of the valley, and the trail will teach you plenty. He swung into his saddle with practiced ease. Mount up. Marian gathered the reins and pulled herself into the saddle, settling her weight carefully. Juniper shifted, but stood steady. They left Pine Ridge behind, following a trail that led north into the foothills. For the first half hour, Caleb rode mostly in silence, letting her get comfortable with Juniper's gait and the uneven terrain. Then he began to talk, pointing out landmarks and details Marian would never have noticed on her own. See that cluster of aspens? He indicated a grove of white-barked trees. They grow where there's water underground. Even if you can't see a stream, you know it's there if the aspens are thriving. So if I were lost, I could find water by looking for aspens. In the mountains, yes. On the plains, you look for cottonwoods. Different trees, same principle. He guided his chestnut around a rocky outcrop. What else do you notice about this trail? Marian looked around, trying to see what he saw. It's rocky. There are pine trees? Look at the pines. Which direction are the branches fuller? She studied them more carefully. The south side? Right. Trees grow more branches toward the sun. If you're turned around and the sun's hidden by clouds, the trees will tell you which way is south. He pointed ahead. What about those clouds building over the peaks? They look like storm clouds. They are. We'll see rain by this afternoon, probably thunder. That's why we're going early. Getting caught on a ridge in a lightning storm is a good way to die. He glanced at her. Out here, you read the land and the sky like you read a book. Miss a word, and you miss the meaning. Miss the meaning, and you're in trouble. They climbed steadily, and Marian found herself absorbed in the lesson. Caleb pointed out animal tracks in soft earth, deer, elk, a black bear's distinctive pad marks. He showed her which plants were safe to touch and which would raise blistering welts. He explained how to judge the sun's position to estimate time, how to recognize the whistle of an elk versus the scream of a mountain lion, how to tell if water was safe to drink. You know so much, she said, after he'd identified 3 different types of pine by their needles. Where did you learn all this? My father taught me some. The rest I learned by watching and listening and making mistakes. He smiled slightly. Plenty of mistakes, believe me. I once tracked what I thought was a deer for 2 hours before realizing it was our milk cow who'd gotten loose. Marian laughed. I can't picture you making that mistake. I was 12 and too proud to admit I couldn't tell the difference yet. Pride makes fools of us all. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. The trick is learning from it instead of letting it kill you. They reached Eagle Point just before noon, a rocky promontory that jutted out over the valley like a ship's prow. Caleb dismounted and helped Marian down, then led her to the edge. The view stole her breath. Pine Ridge lay below them like a child's toy town. The buildings small and neat, the river a silver ribbon winding through the valley. Beyond it, ranches spread across the grasslands in a patchwork of fences and pastures. To the west, the mountains rose in wave after wave of peaks, still snow-capped even in late spring. The sky arched overhead in impossible blue, broken only by those building clouds Caleb had predicted. It's magnificent, Marian breathed. It is. But when she glanced at him, he was watching her face rather than the view. Something in his expression made her pulse quicken. You see it differently than most folks from back east. They look at this and see empty space, loneliness. You look at it and see possibility. Is that wrong? No, just rare. He pulled a wrapped package from his saddlebag. You hungry? They sat on sun-warmed rocks and shared the simple lunch he'd brought. Bread, cheese, dried apples. The wind whispered through the pines behind them. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. Can I ask you something? Marian said after a while. Go ahead. You said I reminded you of your sister. What was she like? Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Emily was 3 years younger than me. Bright as a new penny, curious about everything. She used to drive our mother crazy asking questions. A smile touched his lips at the memory. She wanted to be a doctor. Can you imagine? A woman doctor, out here. But she was determined. Started studying every medical book she could get her hands on. What happened? Scarlet fever swept through the valley the winter she turned 19. She'd been helping Doc Morrison treat the sick, insisted on it, even though Mother begged her to stay home. She caught it herself. His voice remained steady, but his hands tightened on the bread he held. Died 3 days later. Doc Morrison said she'd been exposed to too much of it, helping others. Her body couldn't fight it off. She sounds remarkable. She was. He looked out over the valley. She would have done something important, I think. Made a real difference. Instead, she's buried on our ranch under a cottonwood tree, and the world never got to see what she could have been. Marion heard the old grief in his voice, the what-ifs that probably still haunted him. She did make a difference. She helped people when they needed it. That matters. Maybe. He turned to look at her. That's why I meant it when I said you reminded me of her. That determination to be more than what's expected. Emily would have liked you, would have been first in line to sign up for your classes. I wish I could have known her. She'd have pestered you with questions until you wanted to strangle her. But his smile was warm, and you'd have answered everyone because you're a teacher, and that's what you do. They finished lunch in companionable silence. Then Caleb stood and offered his hand to help her up. We should head back. Storm's coming faster than I thought. He was right. The clouds had built into towering masses, their bases darkening ominously. Thunder rumbled in the distance as they mounted and started down the trail. They were halfway back when the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, it was a downpour, water streaming down Marion's face and soaking through her clothes. Lightning cracked overhead, making Juniper dance nervously. Stay calm, Caleb called over the storm's roar. Keep her moving, but don't let her run. We're almost to the shelter cave. Shelter cave? He didn't answer, just urged his horse forward. Marion followed, trusting him even as thunder boomed so loud it shook her bones. They rounded a bend, and suddenly there was an overhang of rock, deep enough to provide shelter. Caleb dismounted and pulled his horse inside, and Marion quickly followed. The relief from the pelting rain was immediate. They stood in the cave mouth, catching their breath, while outside the storm raged in full fury. Lightning turned the world white, followed instantly by deafening thunder. That was close, Marion gasped, pushing wet hair out of her face. Too close. Storm moved faster than I expected. Caleb pulled a blanket from his saddlebag and draped it around her shoulders. You're shivering. She was. The temperature had dropped with the rain, and her wet clothes clung coldly to her skin. She pulled the blanket tighter, grateful for its warmth. Do storms always come up this fast? In the mountains? Yes. Weather changes quick up here. That's another lesson. Always watch the sky. Always have a backup plan. He leaned against the cave wall, water dripping from his hat brim. You did well, though. Didn't panic when the lightning started. I was terrified. Being scared isn't the same as panicking. You kept control of your horse and followed directions. That's what matters. He studied her face in the dim light. You're tougher than you look, Miss Hale. Is that a compliment? Out here? Absolutely. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cave's interior. It was larger than Marion had first thought, stretching back into darkness. The walls bore marks that looked almost deliberate, scratches and shapes that might have been made by human hands long ago. What is this place? She asked. Old Ute shelter. They used to camp in these mountains before settlers came. You can still find arrowheads sometimes, bits of pottery. He glanced at the marked walls. My father said we're guests in their land, said we should treat it with respect, remember who was here first. Do you believe that? I do. The Utes understood this land in ways we're still learning. They knew how to live with it instead of just taking from it. He pushed away from the wall. Rain's letting up. We should move on before another cell comes through. They rode the rest of the way back to Pine Ridge in comfortable silence, arriving just as the sun broke through the thinning clouds. Steam rose from the wet earth, filling the air with the scent of sage and rain-washed pine. At the livery, Caleb helped her dismount. You did good today. Learned fast. Thank you for teaching me. Marion pulled off the blanket and handed it back. Would you be willing to do this again? Next Saturday? Something warm flickered in his eyes. I'd like that. But next time we'll work on tracking. Make sure you can find your way if you ever get turned around again. I'll be ready. Over the following weeks, Saturday became the day Marion looked forward to most. Caleb proved to be an excellent teacher, Patient but demanding, willing to explain things repeatedly until she understood, never making her feel foolish for her ignorance. He taught her to read animal tracks, to distinguish between the prints of deer, elk, mountain lion, and bear. He showed her how to find north without a compass, using the sun and stars and the pattern of tree growth. He explained the different weather patterns, how to read clouds and wind, and the behavior of animals before a storm. But beyond the practical lessons, he taught her something more subtle, the rhythm of the land itself, how the mountains breathed with the changing seasons, how water shaped everything from where settlements could survive to which trails animals would follow, how paying attention to small details could mean the difference between safety and disaster, and somehow between tracking lessons and storm watching and learning to move quietly through the forest. They began to talk, really talk, in ways Marian hadn't talked to anyone since leaving Boston. She told him about her childhood, her love of books, her frustration with the narrow expectations placed on her. He told her about growing up on the ranch, the responsibility of taking over after his father's death, the loneliness that came with being the one everyone depended on. "Don't you ever want to leave?" she asked one Saturday as they rested beside a mountain stream. "See other places?" "I've been other places. Denver, Cheyenne, even made it to St. Louis once." He skipped a stone across the water. "They didn't take. This is home. The land, the work, the rhythm of seasons. It's in my blood." "But doesn't it feel limiting, always knowing what's coming next?" "The land never lets you know what's coming next. That's the point." He glanced at her. "Every day is different. Cows get sick, fences break, storms come through, predators find the herd. You're always solving problems, always adapting. It's not limiting. It is demanding." "I suppose I never thought of it that way." "Most folks don't." He smiled. "They think ranch life is dull because we're in one place, but the place itself is never the same twice. You just have to pay attention." The sixth Saturday, Caleb showed up at the livery with a pack horse in addition to their riding mounts. "What's that for?" Marian asked. "Tools. We're not just riding today. We're working." At her puzzled look, he explained, "Your schoolhouse has a leak in the roof. I noticed it last time I was in town. And the front steps are getting dangerous. Figured I'd fix them while we're at it." "You don't have to do that." "I know. But the children need a safe place to learn, and it won't take long." He handed her Juniper's reins. "Besides, you're going to help. Time you learned basic repairs." Marian had expected another riding lesson. Instead, she spent the morning learning to patch a roof and replace rotted boards. Caleb worked with steady efficiency, explaining what he was doing and why, letting her hand him tools and hold pieces in place. "You're good at this," she observed, watching him fit a new board into the steps. "Been doing it since I was old enough to hold a hammer. Ranch life means fixing things constantly. Fences, barns, equipment. You learn or everything falls apart." He glanced up at her. "Women need to know this too. Out here, you can't always wait for someone else to handle repairs." "Is that why you're teaching me?" "Part of it." He drove in a nail with 3 precise strikes. Also figured the town would appreciate having their schoolhouse maintained. They worked companionably through the morning. At noon, several students showed up, curious about what was happening. Caleb put them to work too, showing Tommy Brennan how to measure and cut wood, letting the Pritchard sisters paint the new boards with weatherproofing. "Mr. Rollins," little Grace Mitchell asked, "are you going to marry Miss Hale?" Caleb nearly dropped his hammer. Marian felt her face burn. "Grace," she gasped, "that's an inappropriate question. Ma says someone needs to before all the ranch hands start courting her. She says you're the best choice because you've got integrity." Caleb cleared his throat. "Your ma talks too much. Hand me that paintbrush." But when Grace ran off to help her friends, Marian caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between amusement and something deeper, more complicated. That evening, after the work was finished and the children had scattered home, Caleb lingered at the schoolhouse door. "Thank you for this," Marian said, gesturing to the repaired building. "It wasn't necessary, but I'm grateful." "It was necessary. Couldn't have you teaching in a building that might fall apart." He hesitated, then added, "Same reason I've been teaching you about the country. Want to make sure you're safe out here." "I am safe, thanks to you." You'd have learned it from someone. I'm just glad I got there first. He settled his hat on his head. Next Saturday? I'll be here. She watched him ride away, his figure straight and easy in the saddle, and realized with a small shock that she'd stopped thinking of these lessons as mere instruction. She looked forward to Saturdays not just for what she learned, but for the time spent with Caleb himself. His quiet competence, his dry humor, his way of treating her as capable while still teaching her what she needed to know. It was dangerous territory for a woman who'd sworn off men in marriage. But as the sun set over the mountains, painting them in shades of gold and rose, Marian couldn't quite bring herself to regret the direction her heart seemed to be heading. The morning air carried the first hints of summer heat as Marian dismissed her students for the day. 2 months had passed since that first Saturday with Caleb, and their weekly rides had become as much a part of Pine Ridge's rhythm as Sunday services or the Friday night socials at the town hall. She was gathering books when Tommy Brennan burst back through the door, his freckled face flushed with excitement. "Miss Hale, there's a fancy man in town asking about you." Marian's stomach tightened. "What kind of fancy man?" "Real fancy. City clothes, shiny shoes. He's at the boarding house with Mrs. Mitchell." She found them in Sarah's parlor, her landlady serving tea to a portly gentleman in an expensive suit that looked absurdly out of place in Pine Ridge's rough-hewn surroundings. He stood when Marian entered, his smile practiced and smooth. "Miss Hale, what a pleasure. I'm Augustus Galton, representing the Rocky Mountain Silver Company." He extended a card embossed with gilt lettering. "I've heard wonderful things about Pine Ridge's new school teacher." "Mr. Galton." Marian accepted the card warily. "What brings you to Pine Ridge?" "Opportunity, Miss Hale. Progress. The future." His enthusiasm seemed manufactured, like a speech delivered too many times. "My company has just opened a major silver operation in the mountains northeast of here. We're bringing jobs, prosperity, civilization to this frontier." "I see. And what does this have to do with me?" "We're offering tours of the facility to prominent community members, a chance to see modern industry at work, to understand how mining operations benefit everyone in the region." His smile widened. "I'd be honored to include Pine Ridge's educated teacher among our guests. This Saturday, if you're available." Every instinct warned her to refuse. There was something oily about Galton's manner, something that reminded her unpleasantly of the fortune-hunting bachelors her mother had courted on her behalf. But another part of her, the part that had come west seeking adventure, was curious. "A mining operation sounds fascinating," she said carefully. "Could I bring a companion?" Of course. Though I should mention the tour involves some rough terrain. Not all ladies find it suitable." The subtle challenge in his words made her decision. "I'll be there, Mr. Galton. What time should I meet you?" 9 o'clock at the north end of town. I'll have a wagon ready." He bowed with that same practiced flourish. "Until Saturday, Miss Hale." After he left, Sarah's expression was troubled. "I don't like that man." "You don't know him." "Don't need to. I know his type." Sarah collected the tea things with sharp, precise movements. "Men like that see everything as something to be used. The land, the people, all of it." "It's just a tour, Sarah." "Is it? Then why didn't you mention Caleb when he asked about a companion?" Marian felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Caleb and we're not courting. He's simply been kind enough to teach me about the territory." "Honey, half the town knows he's in love with you. The other half is blind." Sarah's expression softened. "And unless I miss my guess, you care for him too. So why keep it from Mr. Fancy Suit?" "Because it's nobody's business, and because—" Marian struggled for words. "Because I need to know I can still do things on my own, make my own choices. I didn't come west to trade one set of expectations for another." Sarah sighed. "Independence is admirable, dear, but there's a difference between standing on your own feet and refusing to let anyone stand beside you." The words haunted Marian through the week. She threw herself into teaching, preparing end-of-term evaluations and planning a summer reading program. But her mind kept circling back to Saturday, both the mining tour and her regular time with Caleb. On Friday evening, Caleb appeared at the boarding house just as Marian was finishing supper. Sarah showed him into the parlor with a knowing look that made Marian want to sink through the floor. Evening, he said, hat in hand. Wanted to confirm tomorrow. I thought we'd head up to Crystal Lake, maybe practice some fishing. Actually, I can't tomorrow. The words came harder than expected. I've made other plans. Something shifted in his expression. Other plans? Mr. Augustus Galton invited me to tour his company's new silver operation. It sounds like an interesting opportunity to see modern mining techniques. Caleb's jaw tightened. Galton, the man who's been buying up water rights and timber stands. I don't know anything about that. He seemed perfectly cordial when he invited me. I'm sure he did. Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. He's good at seeming cordial while he's taking what he wants. You don't even know him. I know his company. They bought the old Henderson place last month, started stripping timber without checking if the land could handle it. Now there's erosion washing into our eastern pastures. He met her gaze directly. And I know men like him. They come west seeing dollar signs, take what they can get, and leave the mess for folks like us to clean up. That's an unfair judgment based on prejudice, not facts. Is it? His tone remained level, but something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. All right, Miss Hale. You go on your tour, but be careful. Mining operations are dangerous, and Galton's company hasn't shown much concern for safety so far. I can take care of myself. Can you? The question was soft, but cut deep. Then I guess you don't need me teaching you anymore. He settled his hat on his head and turned toward the door. Marian felt panic rise in her throat. Caleb, wait. He paused but didn't turn around. I've been teaching you about the country because I wanted to keep you safe. But if you're going to ignore every warning I give you, there's no point in continuing. Enjoy your tour, Miss Hale. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Marian stood frozen in the parlor, her heart hammering. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her expression sympathetic but firm. That was foolish, dear. He doesn't get to tell me what to do. He was trying to warn you, not control you. There's a difference. Sarah crossed to stand beside her. Caleb Rollins is the most patient man I know. Took a lot to make him walk away just now. I didn't ask him to walk away. Didn't you? You've been pushing him back every time he gets close, testing him, seeing if he'll try to cage you like those Boston boys did. Sarah's voice gentled. But Caleb's not trying to cage you, honey. He's trying to teach you to fly, and you keep throwing that back in his face. Marian sank into a chair, the fight draining out of her. I don't know how to do this, Sarah. How to be independent and still let someone care about me. How to be strong without being alone. That's the real adventure, isn't it? Figuring out how to let people in without losing yourself. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you should skip that mining tour. But it's your choice. Just make sure you're choosing for the right reasons. Saturday morning arrived heavy with clouds that pressed down on the mountains like a wool blanket. Marian dressed in her practical riding skirt, still uncertain about her decision, but unwilling to back down now. She told herself it was about independence, about not letting anyone dictate her choices. She tried not to think about Caleb's expression when he'd walked away. Galton waited at the north end of town with a wagon and two rough-looking men he introduced as his foremen. His smile was as bright as the day was gray. Miss Hale, delighted you could join us. This is Foster and Blake. They'll be driving us up to the site. Marian climbed into the wagon, acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. She caught sight of Tommy Brennan watching from outside his father's store, and Grace Mitchell peering from the boarding house window. Neither looked happy. The road, such as it was, wound northeast into increasingly rough country. Galton kept up a steady stream of conversation about the mining operation's importance, the jobs it would create, the prosperity it would bring. But Marian found herself distracted by the landscape. The higher they climbed, the more signs of destruction became visible. Timber had been clear-cut from entire hillsides, leaving raw earth exposed to erosion. Streams ran muddy with silt. The air carried an acrid smell that burned her nose. "What's that odor?" she asked. "Processing chemicals," Galton said dismissively. "Nothing to worry about. All perfectly safe and standard for the industry." They crested a ridge and the mining operation spread below them, a sprawling complex of buildings, enormous piles of tailings, and the gaping mouth of a mine entrance. Men swarmed over it like ants, tiny figures against the scarred landscape. "Impressive, isn't it?" Galton beamed. We're extracting nearly a ton of ore daily. Within 6 months, we expect to triple that output. Marion stared at the destruction. Trees felled and burned in massive piles, earth torn open and left bleeding. The silver thread of a creek that had been dammed and diverted, its natural course abandoned to a muddy trickle. "Where does that creek go?" she asked. "Southeast, eventually. Feeds into several other waterways. Why do you ask?" "Because the Rollins Ranch is southeast of here, and several other ranches. They depend on that water." "Progress requires some sacrifice, Miss Hale. I'm sure the ranchers understand that." Galton gestured toward the mine. "Shall we take a closer look?" The tour that followed turned Marion's stomach. Workers labored in dangerous conditions with minimal safety equipment. The processing area reeked of chemicals that made her eyes water. When she asked about ventilation in the mine shafts, Galton waved off her concerns. "These men know the risks when they sign on. We pay good wages." "How good?" Marion pressed. "Standard rates for the industry." "Which means?" Galton's smile thinned. "Miss Hale, I brought you here to show you the future of the region, not to debate labor practices." They were returning to the wagon when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it was a downpour, turning the torn earth to thick mud. The wagon lurched forward, Foster fighting to control the horses on the slick road. Thunder cracked overhead. Lightning split the sky. "We need to find shelter," Marion shouted over the storm's roar. "We'll be fine," Galton insisted. "Just a summer storm." But it wasn't just a summer storm. The rain came harder, sheeting across the windshield in waves. The wagon wheels spun in mud, losing traction. They were descending a steep section when Marion heard it, a deep, grinding rumble that had nothing to do with thunder. "What's that sound?" Blake yelled. Foster's face went white. "Landslide! Get—" The hillside above them gave way. Marion had one moment of perfect clarity, seeing the wall of mud and rock and shattered timber rushing toward them, understanding with absolute certainty that she was about to die. Then Foster was screaming, and the wagon was tilting, and the world turned to chaos. The impact threw her from the wagon. She hit muddy ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. Debris rained down around her. She tried to scramble away, but the mud was everywhere, pulling at her clothes, dragging her down. Water hit her next. The creek, swollen with rain, its diverted course turned into a torrent that swept through the slide area. She went under, tumbling in brown chaos, unable to tell up from down. Her lungs burned. Her hands grasped uselessly at rushing water. She broke the surface for one gasping breath before going under again. This time she hit something solid, a boulder or fallen tree, she couldn't tell, and pain exploded through her ribs. The current pinned her against it, pressing her down, and she realized with distant calm that this was how she would die. Then hands grabbed her coat, hauling upward with desperate strength. She broke the surface again, choking and gasping, and someone was dragging her toward the bank. Her vision was too blurred to make out faces. She was dimly aware of other voices, of being pulled onto solid ground, of someone pressing on her chest until she coughed up muddy water. "She's breathing. Get her to the wagon." Rough hands lifted her. The world spun sickeningly. She tried to speak but only managed a weak cough. Rain continued to pour down, washing some of the mud from her face. "What in God's name happened here?" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. "How did a slide start in the middle of a storm?" "Mr. Rollins, thank heavens you're here." "Caleb." Through the rain and mud and pain, Marion's heart seized. Caleb was here. But that made no sense. He'd said he was done teaching her. Why would he be here? Strong arms lifted her again, more gently this time. "I've got you. You're safe now." She managed to crack her eyes open. Caleb's face hovered above her, rain-soaked and tight with worry, and something that looked like barely controlled fury. His arms held her against his chest as he carried her toward a wagon. Not Galton's damaged one, but another vehicle with the Rollins Ranch brand on its side. "Jake, get that blanket. Foster, help me get her up." Caleb's voice was commanding, brooking no argument. "Miss Hale, can you hear me?" Caleb?" Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "How?" "Don't talk. Save your strength." He was wrapping her in blankets, his hands surprisingly gentle for their size. "Jake, ride ahead to town. Get Doc Morrison ready. Tell him we're bringing in an emergency." "Yes, sir." Hoofbeats thundered away through the rain. Marian tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her ribs and her head spun nauseously. Caleb's hand pressed her shoulder, keeping her down. Stay still. You hit your head and probably cracked some ribs. The doc needs to check you properly. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping in his cheek. What were you thinking coming up here in weather like this? It was clear when we left. The words cost her more effort than they should have. Storm came fast. Storms always come fast in the mountains. I told you that. His voice was flat, controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. I warned you about Galton, about the operation, but you went anyway. I'm sorry. Tears burned her eyes, whether from pain or regret she couldn't tell. You were right about everything. Something in his expression softened fractionally. We'll talk about it later. Right now I need to get you to town before that head injury gets worse. The ride back was agony. Every jolt of the wagon sent pain shooting through her ribs. Her head throbbed. But worse than the physical pain was watching Caleb's face, seeing the worry there, yes, but also disappointment and something that might have been betrayal. How did you find me? She managed to ask. Saw you leave with Galton this morning. Didn't like it, so I followed. His eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead. Good thing I did. By the time his foreman got you to the bank, you'd already stopped breathing. Had to get the water out of your lungs. You saved my life. The words stuck in her throat. How many times now had this man pulled her from danger? How many times had she dismissed his concerns and ended up needing rescue? The others? She whispered. Foster and Blake are banged up but alive. Galton. Caleb's expression hardened. Galton ran when the slide started, left his own men to save themselves. I saw him halfway down the mountain, riding hell for leather back to his operation. Disgust and shame washed through her. She'd trusted that smooth-talking coward over the man who'd spent months teaching her to survive, who'd fixed her schoolhouse and brought books for her students, who'd never once tried to control her, only to keep her safe. I'm such a fool, she said, her voice breaking. You're alive. That's what matters. But Caleb still wouldn't look at her. Try to rest. We've got another hour to town. Pine Ridge materialized through the rain like a haven. Doc Morrison was waiting at his office, Sarah hovering anxiously beside him. Caleb carried Marian inside and laid her on the examination table with surprising gentleness. Out, Doc Morrison ordered, shooing Caleb and Sarah into the waiting room. Let me work. The examination was thorough and uncomfortable. 3 cracked ribs, the doctor determined, plus a mild concussion, numerous bruises, and cuts that needed cleaning. He wrapped her ribs tightly and made her drink something bitter for the pain. You're lucky, he said, his weathered face stern. Few inches different, and that boulder could have crushed your skull. Few seconds longer in the water and you'd have drowned. You understand that? Yes, sir. Good, because I don't want to see you in here again with injuries from ignoring common sense. He softened slightly. I treated Emily Rollins, Caleb's sister. Watched her die because she put others before her own safety. Seeing him carry you in today, looking like he'd carried his sister's body all over again, he shook his head. That boy doesn't deserve more grief, Miss Hale. The words cut deeper than any of her physical injuries. I know. Doc Morrison let Sarah in to help her into a borrowed nightgown, then pronounced her fit to return to the boarding house as long as she stayed in bed for at least 3 days. Caleb appeared to carry her again. She couldn't walk on her own yet. And this time she let herself lean against his chest, breathing in the scent of rain and leather and safety. He settled her into her bed at the boarding house with the same gentle care, then stepped back toward the door. Caleb, wait. Please. Marian struggled to sit up despite the pain. I need to apologize. You were right about everything, and I was too stubborn to listen. I could have died because of my pride, and I nearly got others killed too. I'm so sorry. He stood silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. You don't owe me an apology for making your own choices. You're a grown woman with a right to decide where you go and what you do. But I should have listened to your warnings. Maybe. Or maybe you needed to learn this lesson yourself. He met her gaze finally, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache worse than her cracked ribs. I'm not angry that you went on the tour, Marian. I'm angry that I wasn't enough reason for you to stay. The use of her first name, the first time he'd ever spoken it, made her breath catch. What do you mean? I mean, I've been in love with you since the day I found you stranded in those foothills. I've spent every Saturday with you, taught you everything I know, fixed your schoolhouse, brought books for your students, not because I wanted to control you or change you, but because I wanted to be part of your life. His voice was quiet but steady. But it's not enough, is it? You're so determined to prove you don't need anyone that you can't see when someone wants to stand beside you, not in front of you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Caleb? Get some rest, Miss Hale. I'm glad you're safe. He turned toward the door. I love you too. The words burst out before she could stop them. I've been terrified to admit it because everyone I've ever known tried to make me smaller. But you never did that. You've only ever made me feel like I could be more, and I was too scared to trust it. He stopped but didn't turn around. Being scared isn't a crime, but running from the things that matter because you're scared? That'll hurt you worse than any mountain lion or landslide ever could. I know that now. I learned it today when I thought I was dying. The last thing I thought about was you. Not Boston, not independence, not adventure, just you, and how much I regretted pushing you away. Slowly, Caleb turned to face her. His expression was guarded, but she could see hope flickering beneath the hurt. You mean that? Every word. She wiped at her tears, wincing as the movement pulled at her ribs. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even expect you to keep teaching me or courting me if that's what we were doing, but I needed you to know the truth. You were right, about Galton, about the danger, about me being too stubborn for my own good, and you were right about us. He crossed to the bed in 3 long strides and sat carefully on its edge, taking her hand in his. I don't want to control you, Marion. I never did. I just want to keep you safe enough to have all those adventures you came west seeking. I know, I see that now. She curled her fingers around his. And I don't want to be alone anymore. I want to be free, yes, but free to choose. And I choose you. If you'll still have me after everything. His smile was slow but genuine, transforming his weathered face. I told you I've been in love with you for months. Did you think one argument would change that? I nearly got myself killed being stubborn. Then I guess I'll have to work harder at keeping you alive. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But Marion, next time I warn you about something, at least consider that I might know what I'm talking about. I promise. She managed a weak laugh that turned into a wince. Though I hope there isn't a next time quite this dramatic. In Pine Ridge, I wouldn't count on it. He reached up to brush a strand of still damp hair from her face. Now get some sleep. Doc's orders. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you. You don't have to. I want to. That's the difference. His thumb traced gentle circles on her hand. Being with someone isn't about obligation. It's about wanting to show up, wanting to help, wanting to be there for the good days and the bad ones. And I want to be here, Marion, for all of it. She felt fresh tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the earlier ones, tears of relief and gratitude and something that felt dangerously close to joy despite her battered body. I want that too, she whispered. He leaned down and pressed a careful kiss to her forehead, mindful of her injuries. Then we'll figure it out together. Now sleep before Sarah comes in here and scolds us both. He was almost to the door when Marion called out one more time. Caleb, thank you for following me today, for not giving up on me even when I was being impossible. He looked back, and his smile held all the warmth that had been missing earlier. That's what love is, Marion. Following someone even when they don't ask. Being there even when they push you away. Not because you have to, but because you can't imagine being anywhere else. Then he was gone, leaving Marion alone with her aching ribs and bruised body and heart that felt fuller than it had in months. She closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her under. And for the first time since coming west, she didn't dream of adventure or freedom or escape. She dreamed of home, and it looked like steady hands and gentle eyes and a man who loved her enough to let her be strong while still keeping her safe. 3 days of bed rest gave Marion too much time to think. She lay in her room at the boarding house, ribs aching with every breath, and replayed the landslide over and over in her mind. The wall of mud rushing toward them, the freezing water closing over her head, the certainty that she was drowning, and then Caleb's hands pulling her back to life. Sarah brought meals on trays and town gossip with equal regularity. The story of the mining disaster had spread through Pine Ridge like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. In some versions, Marion had been swept a mile downstream. In others, Caleb had fought off a pack of wolves to reach her. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment, but that didn't stop people from adding their own flourishes. "The whole town's talking about how Mr. Rollins saved you," Grace Mitchell announced on the second day, perched on the edge of Marion's bed like an eager sparrow. "Ma says it's the most romantic thing that's happened in Pine Ridge since the war ended." "It wasn't romantic, Grace. It was terrifying. But he followed you because he loves you. That's what Ma says. She says you'll be married by autumn for sure." Marion's face burned. "Your mother needs to spend less time speculating about my personal life." "She can't help it. There's not much else happening." Grace leaned closer, dropping her voice conspiratorially. "Is it true Mr. Galton ran away and left his own men to die?" "I don't know exactly what happened. Everything was very chaotic." But she did know. She'd seen Galton's absence in the aftermath, heard the disgusted comments from Foster and Blake. The man who'd been so smooth and charming in Sarah's parlor had abandoned his workers the moment real danger appeared. The contrast to Caleb, who'd followed her despite their argument, who'd risked his own life to save hers, couldn't have been starker. On the fourth day, Doc Morrison pronounced her well enough to move around carefully, though he insisted the ribs would take weeks to fully heal. Marion dressed herself slowly, wincing at every movement, and made her way downstairs to find Sarah in the kitchen. "Well, look who's mobile," Sarah said with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, foolish, grateful to be alive." Marion accepted the cup of tea Sarah pressed into her hands. "Has there been any news about the mining operation?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Plenty, and none of it good." Over the next hour, Sarah filled her in on what had transpired while Marion recovered. The landslide had been caused by the mining company's reckless timber clearing and creek diversion, exactly as Caleb had predicted. The unstable hillside, stripped of trees and saturated by diverted water, had simply given way under the storm's assault. Worse, the diverted creek had been the primary water source for several ranches downstream, including the Rollins spread. With the creek dammed and contaminated by mining runoff, those ranches were facing serious shortages. "Caleb rode out yesterday morning," Sarah said quietly. "He's been gone ever since. His ranch hands came through town this morning looking worried, said the cattle are already showing signs of stress from lack of water." Guilt twisted in Marion's stomach. While she'd been recovering in comfortable safety, Caleb had been dealing with the consequences of the very operation she'd insisted on touring. "I need to see him." "You need to rest." "I've rested for 3 days. I need to do something useful." Marion stood carefully, testing her balance. "Where's his ranch?" "About 5 miles southeast. But Marion, you're in no condition to ride." "I won't ride. I'll take the wagon. I can manage that much." She met Sarah's concerned gaze. "Please, Sarah, I need to help fix what I helped break." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're as stubborn as he is. All right, but you're taking Grace's father with you. I won't have you driving alone with cracked ribs." An hour later, Marion sat beside Pete Mitchell in his wagon, following the rutted road that led to Rollins Ranch. The landscape here was different from the forested mountains, open grassland rolling toward distant foothills, dotted with cattle that looked thin and restless. "Creek used to run right through here," Pete said, gesturing to a dry channel cutting across the range. "Reliable water year-round. Now look at it." The creek bed was bone dry, its banks cracked and dusty. A few stagnant pools remained, green with algae and buzzing with insects. Marion's throat tightened at the visible evidence of what Galton's operation had done. The Rollins ranch house appeared as they crested a low rise, a sturdy 2-story structure built from local timber with a wide porch and corrals spreading out behind it. Several smaller buildings dotted the property, bunkhouses, a barn, storage sheds. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, or would have if not for the groups of worried-looking ranch hands gathered near the barn. Pete pulled the wagon to a stop near the main house. "Want me to wait?" "No, thank you. I'll find a way back to town." Marion climbed down carefully, her ribs protesting the movement. "I appreciate your help, Pete." "Just take care of yourself, Miss Hale. Town needs its teacher in one piece. As the wagon rolled away, Marian made her way toward the house. She was halfway there when the front door opened and a woman emerged, tall and weathered, with gray-streaked dark hair and eyes that reminded Marian instantly of Caleb. "You must be Miss Hale." The woman's voice was neither welcoming nor hostile, just assessing. "I'm Margaret Rollins, Caleb's mother." "Mrs. Rollins, I'm sorry to arrive unannounced. I was hoping to speak with Caleb. He's out checking the North Pasture water situation. Won't be back until evening." Margaret studied her with the same direct gaze her son had. "You look like you should still be in bed. I needed to see how things were here, to see if there was anything I could do to help." "Help?" Something flickered across Margaret's face. Not quite amusement, but close. "You're the teacher who nearly got herself killed on that mining tour, the one my son's been fretting over for weeks now. What exactly did you think you could do to help with a water crisis?" The blunt assessment stung, but Marian lifted her chin. "I don't know yet, but I can't just sit in town while Caleb deals with problems caused partly by my poor judgment." Margaret's expression softened fractionally. "Come inside. You look ready to fall over, and I won't have it said I left an injured woman standing in the sun." The ranch house interior was comfortable and lived in, with worn furniture that spoke of decades of use and windows that framed spectacular views of the surrounding range. Margaret settled Marian in a chair and brought water without being asked. "Caleb told me about you," Margaret said, taking a seat across from her. "Said you were the most stubborn, independent woman he'd ever met. Said you reminded him of Emily." Marian's hand tightened on the water glass. "He told me about your daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. Emily was fierce like you, determined to make her own way, prove she was as capable as any man." Margaret's eyes grew distant. "I admired that about her, even when it scared me. But determination without wisdom gets people killed. Emily learned that too late." The parallel was obvious and painful. "Caleb's been trying to teach me wisdom." "Has he succeeded?" "I'm here, aren't I? Instead of insisting I don't need help or can handle everything alone." Marian set down the glass. "Mrs. Rollins, your son saved my life, twice now. And instead of being grateful, I fought him every step of the way because I was so scared of losing my independence that I couldn't see he wasn't trying to take it from me." Margaret's expression warmed slightly. "And now? Now I understand the difference between being controlled and being loved. Between someone trying to cage you and someone trying to keep you safe enough to fly." She met the older woman's gaze directly. "I love your son, Mrs. Rollins, and if he'll let me, I want to help him fight this battle with the mining company. Even though you have no experience with ranching or water rights or corporate disputes?" "Especially because of that. I may not know ranching, but I do know people. I know how to organize, how to teach, how to make people understand things they'd rather ignore." Marian leaned forward, ignoring the pull on her ribs. "Galton's company is destroying this valley, and most people in town don't realize it yet. But they will. We'll make sure they do." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile that transformed her weathered face. "I can see why Caleb loves you. You've got Emily's fire and more sense than she had at your age." She stood. "Come on. If you're serious about helping, you might as well start now. We're gathering evidence of the water contamination for when the territorial judge arrives next month." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Margaret showed Marian their documentation, water samples, photographs of the dried creek bed, witness statements from affected ranchers. The evidence was damning, but Margaret was worried it wouldn't be enough. "Galton's company has lawyers, money, political connections," she explained. "We have dead cattle and dry creek beds. Judges tend to favor industry over ranchers, especially when jobs and tax revenue are involved. Then we need to make it impossible for the judge to ignore the human cost," Marian said, an idea forming. "Not just the economic impact, but what it means for families, for children, for the future of this valley. How do you propose we do that?" Marian's mind was racing now, connecting pieces. "The town picnic. It's in 3 weeks, isn't it?" "Last Saturday in June, like always. Why?" "Because everyone in the valley will be there, ranchers, townspeople, families, and because I have 20 students who can help demonstrate exactly what Galton's company is doing to our water." Margaret's eyes sharpened with interest. I'm listening. They spent the next 2 hours planning, Margaret contributing her knowledge of ranching and water rights while Marion shaped it into something people could see and understand. By the time Caleb rode in at sunset, they had the skeleton of a strategy. He dismounted in the yard and froze when he saw Marion sitting on the porch with his mother. His face cycled through surprise, concern, and something warm that made Marion's heart skip. "What are you doing here?" He crossed the yard in long strides. "You should be resting." "I've been resting for 3 days. I needed to help." She stood carefully, meeting him at the porch steps. "Your mother's been showing me what the mining company has done to your water supply." "It's bad." The weariness in his voice cut through her. "We've lost 6 head already. More will die if we don't get water flowing soon." "Then we'll make sure you do." Marion laid a hand on his arm. "I have a plan, Caleb, but I'll need your help, and your mother's, and the whole town's." Over supper, Margaret insisted Marion stay, brooking no argument. They outlined the plan. Caleb listened with growing approval, occasionally suggesting modifications or additions. By the time the meal ended, they had a comprehensive strategy. "It's risky," Caleb said. "If Galton catches wind of it beforehand, he could interfere." "Then we don't give him the chance," Marion met his gaze. "We move fast, we stay quiet, and we make it so public he can't shut it down without looking worse." Margaret smiled. "I like her, Caleb. She's got spine." "I know." His eyes hadn't left Marion's face. "Mother, could you give us a moment?" "Take your time." Margaret collected the dishes with barely concealed satisfaction. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." Alone on the porch, with twilight painting the mountains purple and gold, Caleb took Marion's hand gently. "You shouldn't have come out here with cracked ribs." "I had to. I needed to see what was happening, needed to help fix what I helped break." "You didn't break anything. Galton's company did." "But I ignored your warnings about them. I chose to trust a stranger's smooth words over everything you'd taught me." She squeezed his hand. "I won't make that mistake again." "I hope not. I don't think my heart could take watching you nearly die a third time." She stepped closer until she could feel his warmth in the cooling evening air. "Caleb, I meant what I said in the boarding house. I love you, and I want to stand beside you, not just for this fight with the mining company, but for everything that comes after. Even though it means staying in Pine Ridge, building a life here instead of chasing adventures elsewhere. The greatest adventure I've ever had has been learning to see the world through your eyes. Learning that real courage isn't about refusing help, it's about accepting it from the right people." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the rasp of stubble under her palm. "You're my adventure, Caleb Rollins, you and this wild country and the life we could build together." He caught her hand, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "Then I guess we'd better win this fight. Because I want that life with you, Marion. Want it more than I've wanted anything since Emily died." "We'll win." She said it with certainty she genuinely felt. "Because we're not just fighting for water or cattle. We're fighting for our home." The next 3 weeks transformed Pine Ridge into a hub of quiet, determined activity. Marion returned to teaching with renewed purpose, but her lesson plans now included detailed studies of water systems, mining impacts, and environmental stewardship. Her students threw themselves into the project with enthusiasm, especially when they learned they'd be demonstrating their knowledge at the town picnic. Tommy Brennan became her most dedicated helper, organizing the other children and running messages between town and the various ranches. The Pritchard sisters created elaborate charts showing water flow patterns. Even shy James Holbrook contributed, using his father's blacksmithing skills to build demonstration equipment. Meanwhile, Caleb and the other affected ranchers gathered evidence and recruited allies. They discovered that the Rollins spread wasn't the only one suffering. Half a dozen smaller ranches downstream were also facing water shortages. Some had already lost livestock. Others were considering selling out, which would only strengthen the mining company's hold on the region. Marion spent her evenings at the ranch now, helping Margaret organize documentation and preparing presentations. The work brought her closer to Caleb's family, and she found herself falling in love, not just with him, but with the life he'd built. The rhythm of ranch work, the loyalty of his employees, the way the land demanded both strength and respect. "You fit here," Margaret told her one evening as they worked side by side. Some people from back east never adjust. They keep trying to make the West into something it's not. But you've learned to bend with it, work with it. Caleb taught me that. How to read the land instead of fighting it. He's taught you more than that, I think. Margaret's smile was knowing. He's taught you that accepting help isn't weakness, and you've taught him that loving someone doesn't mean holding them back. The observation struck deep. Marian realized Margaret was right. She and Caleb had been teaching each other all along. Not just practical skills like tracking or water management, but something more fundamental about trust and partnership. 2 days before the picnic, Augustus Galton appeared in Pine Ridge again. He swept into town with the same false bonhomie as before, but this time people watched him with suspicion rather than curiosity. Word had spread about his abandonment of his workers during the landslide. He cornered Marian outside the general store, his smile brittle. "Miss Hale, I'm delighted to see you've recovered from that unfortunate accident." "It wasn't an accident, Mr. Galton. It was a disaster caused by your company's reckless practices." His expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you're prepared to back it up." "I am, and I will, at the town picnic this Saturday. Everyone's invited. You should come." "Is that a threat?" "It's an invitation to hear the truth about what your operation is doing to this valley." She met his gaze steadily, feeling none of the uncertainty that would have plagued her months ago. "The territorial judge will be there. Most of the ranchers, all the townspeople, and my students who've been studying water systems and environmental impact. It should be very educational." Galton's face flushed. "You're making a mistake, Miss Hale. My company brings jobs and prosperity to this region. If you convince people to reject progress, Pine Ridge will remain a backwater forever. If your version of progress means destroying the land and water people depend on, then I'm happy to see Pine Ridge remain exactly as it is." She stepped past him toward the store entrance. "Saturday, Mr. Galton. I look forward to seeing you there." She could feel his glare boring into her back as she entered the store, but she kept her head high and her hands steady. The old Marian would have second-guessed herself, worried she'd been too confrontational. The new Marian, the one who'd learned that real strength meant standing up for what mattered, felt only certainty. Saturday dawned clear and perfect, the kind of June morning that made people remember why they'd come west in the first place. The town picnic was held in the meadow beside the river, the same river that fed the creek Galton's company had diverted. By mid-morning, it seemed like everyone in the valley had gathered, ranchers with their families, townspeople in Sunday clothes, children running wild in the sunshine. The territorial judge, a stern-looking man named Harrison, had arrived the night before and sat now at the head table with Pine Ridge's mayor and other town leaders. Marian spotted Galton standing near the refreshment tables, surrounded by men in expensive suits who must be his lawyers and company representatives. "Ready?" Caleb appeared at her elbow, looking handsome in clean clothes and a new hat. "Ready." She squeezed his hand quickly, drawing strength from his presence. "Are the ranchers in position?" "All of them. We'll speak after your students finish their demonstration." The picnic's official proceedings began with speeches from the mayor and judge, standard platitudes about community and progress. Then Marian stood and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. My students have prepared a special presentation about our valley's water systems. I hope you'll give them your attention." What followed was the result of 3 weeks of careful planning and enthusiastic student effort. Tommy Brennan explained how mountain watersheds worked, using a large relief map the children had built. The Pritchard sisters demonstrated with colored water how mining runoff contaminated streams. James Holbrook showed what happened when a creek was dammed and diverted, how the natural flow patterns were disrupted, affecting everything downstream. The presentation was clear, visual, and devastating in its implications. Murmurs spread through the crowd as people began connecting the dots between the children's demonstration and the reality of Galton's operation. Then came the evidence. Caleb stepped forward with jars of water, one from the creek before the mining operation began, clear and clean, and one from the same location now, cloudy with sediment and reeking of chemicals. "This is what the Rocky Mountain Silver Company calls progress," he said, his voice carrying across the meadow. "Poisoned water that our cattle can't drink, our families can't use, our land can't sustain." Other ranchers came forward with their own evidence, photographs of dead livestock, testimony about failing wells and contaminated springs, financial records showing the economic devastation spreading through the valley. Judge Harrison's expression grew increasingly stern. He gestured for Galton to approach. "Mr. Galton, I think you'd better explain what's happening at your operation." Galton's face was red with anger, but he managed a tight smile. "Your Honor, these accusations are gross exaggerations by people who don't understand modern mining techniques. Some environmental impact is unavoidable, but it's temporary and necessary for economic development. I visited the site yesterday," the judge interrupted coldly. "After receiving complaints from several ranchers, what I saw there was not temporary impact. It was systematic destruction and criminal negligence." The crowd murmured louder. Galton's lawyers clustered around him, whispering urgently. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "I've reviewed the water rights documentation. Your company's diversion of the creek was done without proper permits and in direct violation of existing agreements with downstream landholders. That constitutes theft of resources under territorial law. Your Honor, if we could discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. I'm issuing an immediate cease and desist order for all mining operations until proper environmental and legal reviews can be conducted. The creek will be restored to its natural course within 2 weeks, and your company will be liable for damages to affected parties." Harrison's gavel cracked against the table. "If those orders are not followed, I'll have federal marshals enforce them. Am I understood?" Galton looked like he wanted to argue, but his lawyers were already pulling him aside, their expressions grim. The crowd broke into applause and cheers. Marian felt tears prick her eyes as neighbors congratulated her, as students hugged her, as people she barely knew thanked her for standing up to the mining company. But what mattered most was Caleb's arm around her shoulders, his quiet pride in how she'd transformed from the frightened woman who'd needed rescuing to the fierce advocate who'd rallied an entire community. "You did it," he murmured in her ear. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together." The picnic transformed into a celebration. Food appeared from seemingly nowhere. Dishes brought by grateful ranchers' wives, pies donated by the bakery, lemonade mixed by the barrel. Music started up, and couples took to the cleared area for dancing. Caleb claimed Marian's hand for the first waltz. She moved carefully, still protecting her healing ribs, but the joy bubbling through her made the pain insignificant. "You know what this means," he said as they swayed to the music. "The ranch will have water again?" "That too." His eyes held warmth and something deeper. "But I meant that you're part of this community now, really part of it. You fought for Pine Ridge, for the valley, for all of us. You belong here." The words settled into her heart like coming home. "I do belong here, don't I? Not because I'm running from Boston, but because I chose this place, these people, this life." "And?" He pulled her slightly closer. "Did you choose me too?" "I chose you first," she admitted. "Everything else just followed." Around them, Pine Ridge celebrated its victory. Children shrieked with laughter. Ranchers who'd been facing ruin now talked about the future with renewed hope. The river flowed clear and bright, unchanged by the drama it had witnessed. And Marian Hale, who'd come west seeking adventure and found instead something far more precious: purpose, community, and love with a cowboy who'd taught her that real courage wasn't about refusing help, but about accepting it from the right hands, danced in the sunshine and knew she was finally, completely home. The music faded as the sun dipped toward the mountains, painting the meadow in shades of amber and rose. Marian felt Caleb's hand tighten on hers as the last notes of the waltz died away, and when she looked up at him, his expression held a question that made her heart skip. "Walk with me?" he asked quietly. She nodded, letting him lead her away from the celebration toward the river's edge. Behind them, the picnic continued, laughter and conversation blending with the water's gentle rush. But the noise seemed to fade as they moved into the soft evening light. They stopped where willows draped over the bank, their leaves creating a private curtain from the world. The river ran clear here, untouched by mining operations, and Marian could see smooth stones on the bottom, rainbow trout darting between shadows. "I've been thinking about something," Caleb said, still holding her hand. "About what comes next." "The creek restoration? Judge Harrison said 2 weeks. Not that, though yes, we'll handle that too." He turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her breath catch. I'm talking about us, Marion, about what we're building between us. Oh. The single syllable came out smaller than intended. I know it hasn't been long. 4 months since I found you stranded in those foothills, 3 months of teaching you to read the land, and only a few weeks since we admitted how we felt. His thumb traced circles on her hand, the gesture nervous despite his steady voice. But out here, time moves different. You learn fast what matters and what doesn't. And you matter, Marion. More than anything else in my life. Tears pricked her eyes. Caleb, let me finish, please. He took a breath. When Emily died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just work the ranch, take care of Mother, and that would be enough. Then you arrived with your Boston education and your stubborn independence and your hunger to experience everything, and suddenly enough wasn't enough anymore. You made me want more. Want a future that included partnership and love and building something together. I want that too, she whispered. Then marry me. The words were simple, direct, utterly Caleb. Not because you need protection or because society expects it, not because you're giving up your independence or your dreams, but because we're better together than apart, because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. Joy and fear warred in Marion's chest. She'd come west to escape exactly this, marriage proposals that felt like cages, relationships that demanded she make herself smaller. But looking at Caleb's face, seeing the hope and uncertainty there, she understood that what he was offering wasn't a cage at all. It was wings. Yes, she said, and watched his expression transform. Yes, I'll marry you. Because you're right. We are better together. Because you've never once tried to change who I am, only helped me become more of myself. Because loving you is the greatest adventure I could imagine. He pulled her close then, careful of her still healing ribs, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his smile was bright enough to rival the sunset. I don't have a ring yet, he admitted. Didn't want to presume. I don't need a ring right now. I just need you. You've got me. Had me since the day you told that mountain lion you'd come west for adventure, not to be rescued. His laugh was warm against her hair. Though I should probably get you a ring before Mother finds out I proposed without one. She'd have my hide. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Margaret's voice called across the meadow. Caleb, Marion! You two better get back here before people start making assumptions. Too late for that, Caleb called back, grinning. He laced his fingers through Marion's and started back toward the celebration. Come on, future Mrs. Rollins, let's tell everyone. The announcement was met with cheers and congratulations that seemed to shake the very mountains. Sarah Mitchell burst into happy tears and immediately began planning the wedding. Margaret embraced Marion with surprising warmth, whispering, Emily would have loved you. Welcome to the family. The students mobbed them both, Grace declaring loudly that she'd known it all along. Even Judge Harrison offered his congratulations, adding with dry humor, at least something good came from that mining disaster, though I'd appreciate if future courtships in my jurisdiction involved less near-death experiences. The celebration stretched late into the evening. Bonfires were lit as darkness fell, casting dancing shadows across happy faces. Marion found herself passed from group to group, ranch wives offering advice on frontier marriage, townspeople expressing approval, children begging to be included in the wedding party. Through it all, Caleb stayed close, his presence a steady anchor in the joyful chaos. And Marion realized this was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not solitary adventure, but belonging. Not independence from everyone, but the freedom to choose who she stood beside. As the week following the picnic unfolded, Pine Ridge buzzed with wedding preparations and creek restoration efforts in equal measure. Judge Harrison had wasted no time implementing his orders. Federal marshals arrived to oversee the mining company's compliance, and Galton's operation ground to a halt under their watchful eyes. Caleb led the effort to restore the creek's natural course, working alongside other ranchers and volunteer townspeople. Marion split her time between teaching and helping coordinate supplies for the workers. She'd watch from the schoolhouse window sometimes, seeing Caleb direct men with quiet authority, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back, and feel a surge of pride that this capable, principled man had chosen her. You're staring again, Tommy Brennan observed during arithmetic lessons. Marian felt her face heat. I'm simply observing the restoration progress. Uh-huh. That's why you're smiling like that. But the boy's grin held no mockery, only the innocent pleasure of seeing his teacher happy. Within 10 days, the creek was flowing freely again through its natural channel. The dammed section was dismantled, the diverted water released back where it belonged. The change was immediate and dramatic. Dry creek beds filled with rushing water, stagnant pools flushed clean, vegetation already beginning to recover along the banks. The first time Marian saw water flowing through the Rollins ranch again, she stood beside Caleb and Margaret watching cattle drink deeply and felt tears of relief stream down her face. It's really over, she breathed. This part is, Caleb agreed. Galton's company is pulling out completely. Too much bad publicity and legal trouble to continue. Judge Harrison says they'll be required to fund restoration efforts for at least 5 years. He slipped an arm around her waist. But something better is just beginning. He was right. As July arrived with its brilliant sunshine and afternoon thunderstorms, Pine Ridge transformed into wedding central. Sarah appointed herself chief coordinator, marshaling the town's women with military efficiency. Margaret contributed family heirlooms and recipes from Caleb's grandmother. Even the usually gruff Doc Morrison got involved, offering his garden for the ceremony. It's the prettiest spot in town, he insisted when Marian tried to protest. And Emily always said she wanted to see a wedding there someday. Seems fitting. The mention of Emily brought tears to Caleb's eyes. She would have liked that. Thank you, Doc. Marian threw herself into preparations while maintaining her teaching duties. Her students were invaluable helpers. Grace and the Pritchard sisters gathered wildflowers. Tommy and James helped build benches for guests, and the older children practiced songs for the ceremony. But the most important preparation happened in quiet moments between Marian and Caleb as they planned not just a wedding, but a life together. I want to keep teaching, she told him one evening as they sat on the ranch house porch, watching the sun set over mountains that had become as familiar as old friends. At least for a few more years. The children need consistency, and I love the work. I wouldn't want you to stop, though I'll admit I'm looking forward to the day we have children of our own in that schoolhouse. The thought sent warmth through her chest. How many children are you imagining? However many we're blessed with. 3? 4? A whole schoolroom full? His grin was teasing, but his eyes were serious. I want to fill that house I'm building with laughter and noise and all the chaos that comes with family. You're building a house? Started it last month before the mining disaster interrupted everything. It's up on the ridge overlooking the eastern pasture. Best view on the ranch. He took her hand. I was going to wait to show you until it was finished, but since we're getting married in 3 weeks, you should probably see where you'll be living. He took her there the next Saturday, their first ride together since before the landslide. Marian's ribs had finally healed enough for her to mount Juniper without wincing, and the freedom of riding through open country again felt like rediscovering flight. The house site was everything Caleb had promised, a gentle rise that commanded views of the ranch, the valley, and the mountains beyond. The structure was still skeletal, just framing and partial walls, but Marian could already see what it would become. 3 bedrooms upstairs, Caleb explained, walking her through the space. Main bedroom here, with windows facing the sunrise. 2 more for children, and we can add on if we need more space later. Downstairs has a proper kitchen, Mother's been advising on the layout, and a parlor, dining room, and a study. A study? For you. Thought you'd want space for books and lesson planning. Maybe writing, if you're inclined that way. He watched her face carefully. I want this house to be yours as much as mine, Marian. Want you to have room for all the things that matter to you. She turned to him, love swelling so large in her chest she could barely breathe. How are you real? How did I get so lucky? I'm the lucky one. I get to spend my life with a woman who fights mountain lions and mining companies with equal courage. He pulled her close. Though I'd appreciate it if the fighting could be metaphorical from now on, my heart can't take much more actual danger. She laughed against his chest. I'll try to limit my adventures to the classroom variety. Somehow I doubt that. You've got too much fire in you for safe living. But his voice held only affection. I wouldn't change it, though. Your fire is what I love. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations and growing anticipation. Sarah finished Marion's dress, a simple but elegant design in ivory silk, practical enough for frontier living but beautiful enough to make her feel like a bride. Margaret taught her family recipes and ranch management skills, treating her like the daughter she'd lost. The other ranchers' wives took her under their collective wing, offering advice on everything from laundry to livestock to love. Some of it was practical, some humorous, all of it given with genuine affection for the teacher who'd helped save their livelihoods. "You're one of us now," Anna Pritchard told her over coffee one afternoon. "Stood with us when it mattered. That's what counts out here. Not where you came from, but what you do when times get hard." The words settled into Marion's heart like a blessing. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Pine Ridge 5 months ago, scared beneath her determination, running from one life without being certain what she was running toward. That woman seemed like a stranger now. She'd found what she was running toward, had found it in mountain trails and schoolhouse lessons, in cracked ribs and creek restorations, in the steady hands and patient heart of a cowboy who taught her that real freedom wasn't about being alone. It was about choosing who you stood beside. The night before the wedding, Sarah insisted Marion stay at the boarding house according to tradition. She lay in her familiar room, listening to Pine Ridge settle into sleep, and thought about tomorrow. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, appearing in the doorway with tea. "Terrified, excited, happy. All of it at once." "That's how you know it's right." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "I've known Caleb since he was born. Watched him grow from boy to man. Watched him carry the weight of responsibility after his father died and again after Emily passed. I've never seen him as happy as he's been these past months with you. He saved my life multiple times. And you saved his, just not in ways you can measure." Sarah squeezed her hand. "He was withering before you came, Marion, going through motions, doing his duty, but not really living. You reminded him what it means to be alive. He did the same for me." "I know. That's why this is going to work." Sarah stood, smoothing her skirts. "Now get some sleep. You've got a wedding to attend tomorrow, and Margaret will never forgive me if you have circles under your eyes." But Marion lay awake long after Sarah left, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling and thinking about tomorrow. About promises she'd make not because society demanded them, but because her heart insisted on them. About the life she'd build with Caleb, teaching and ranching, learning and growing, facing whatever challenges came together. She'd come west seeking adventure. She'd found something infinitely better. Morning arrived bright and perfect, the kind of late July day that made the Colorado Territory feel like paradise. Sarah and Margaret descended on Marion like loving whirlwinds, helping her dress and arranging her hair while offering competing advice that made her laugh despite her nerves. The dress fit perfectly, skimming her figure in ways that made her feel both beautiful and like herself. Sarah wove wildflowers into her braided hair, columbines and Indian paintbrush, the same flowers she'd been picking the day Caleb first found her. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "You look like you belong here," Margaret said softly, adjusting Marion's collar, "like the mountains themselves dressed you for this day." Doc Morrison's garden had been transformed into something magical. Benches borrowed from the church lined a center aisle scattered with pine needles and flower petals. An arch covered in climbing roses marked where Caleb waited, and beyond him the mountains rose in their eternal grandeur, snow-capped peaks gleaming against impossible blue sky. The entire town had turned out, ranchers in their Sunday best, townspeople dressed in their finest, children scrubbed clean and barely containing their excitement. Marion recognized faces she'd taught, families she'd fought beside, people who'd become her community in ways Boston society never had. Then Caleb turned to watch her approach, and everyone else faded into insignificance. He wore a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean strength, his hair trimmed and his jaw freshly shaved. But what caught her breath was his expression, joy and love and wonder, so naked on his face that she felt tears prick her eyes. She walked toward him without anyone giving her away, because she'd given herself away months ago on a mountain trail when a stubborn cowboy had refused to let her face danger alone. They met under the rose arch, and Caleb took her hands in his grip warm and steady. The ceremony was conducted by Pine Ridge's circuit preacher, a kindly man who'd known Caleb since childhood. His words about love and partnership and facing life's storms together resonated with truth earned through experience rather than empty platitudes. Marriage in this territory isn't for the faint of heart, he said. It requires courage, strength, and the willingness to stand together when the world gets hard. But I've watched these two young people face down mining companies and mountain lions, and I have no doubt they'll face whatever comes with the same determination. When it came time for vows, Caleb spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. Marian, I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you as partners. I promise to respect your strength while offering mine when you need it. I promise to love you fiercely and faithfully in good times and hard times for all the days of my life. He paused, then added quietly, You asked me once if I ever wanted to leave this place. The truth is, wherever you are is home to me now. Marian's voice shook but held firm as she made her own promises. Caleb, I came west seeking adventure, but I found something far more precious. I found you. I promise to love you with all the courage you've taught me to have. I promise to build a life with you that honors both independence and partnership. I promise to face whatever comes with you beside me, knowing that together we're stronger than anything the world can throw at us. The rings were simple gold bands that Margaret had commissioned from Pine Ridge's jeweler. As Caleb slipped one onto Marian's finger, she remembered all the times these hands had pulled her back from danger, taught her to read the land, held her when she needed comfort. With this ring, I thee wed, he said, and the ancient words felt brand new. She returned the gesture, sliding his ring into place and marveling that this strong, capable man had chosen to bind his life to hers. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher declared. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Children threw handfuls of flower petals. Someone started playing a fiddle, and Marian and Caleb walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Rawlins, beginning the next chapter of their adventure together. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food, lively music, dancing that lasted until twilight. Marian was swept from partner to partner for dances, congratulated until her cheeks hurt from smiling, and toasted so many times she lost count. But the moment she treasured most came during a brief quiet spell when she and Caleb managed to slip away to the edge of Doc Morrison's garden. They stood together looking at the mountains, his arm around her waist and her head on his shoulder, and just breathed. Happy? He asked. More than I ever imagined possible. She turned to face him. Thank you for not giving up on me, for teaching me that I could be strong and loved at the same time. Thank you for taking a chance on a stubborn cowboy, for seeing that I wasn't trying to cage you, just trying to love you. He kissed her forehead. Ready to head home? Home. The word resonated through her chest, not the boarding house where she'd been staying, or even the finished house that awaited them at the ranch. Home was this man, this place, this life they'd build together. Yes, she said simply. Let's go home. They left the celebration to cheers and well wishes, riding together toward the Rawlins ranch as husband and wife. The house Caleb had built stood finished now, completed just days before the wedding, windows gleaming in the sunset, porch welcoming, every detail crafted with love and care. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, and they stood together in the main room taking in what would be their shared space. Furniture Margaret had contributed, books Marian had collected, little touches that made it already feel lived in and loved. Welcome home, Mrs. Rawlins, Caleb said, setting her down gently. It's perfect. You're perfect. She pulled him down for a kiss that held all the love and gratitude and joy she couldn't put into words. I can't believe I almost missed this. Almost let fear and stubbornness rob me of the best thing that ever happened to me. But you didn't miss it. You chose it. That's what matters. He rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Marian Rawlins. Love your courage and your heart and the way you fight for what matters. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They stood there as twilight deepened outside their windows, holding each other in their new home, and Marian felt a completeness she'd never known before. She'd come west as Marian Hale, running from one life without knowing what she was running toward. She'd become Marian Rollins, running toward everything that mattered: love, purpose, belonging, and the kind of partnership that made her more rather than less. Summer turned to autumn as Marian settled into married life. She continued teaching, her reputation as Pine Ridge's fierce and capable educator firmly established. The students thrived under her guidance, and several who'd been struggling before her arrival were now reading ahead of their grade levels. The house on the ridge became a home in all the ways that mattered. Caleb installed shelves in her study, and she filled them with books. They hosted dinners for friends and family. Margaret became a regular visitor, teaching Marian the finer points of ranch life and sharing stories about Caleb's childhood that made him blush. The Rocky Mountain Silver Company's operation remained shut down, its buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Judge Harrison's orders had been thorough and unforgiving. The company paid substantial damages to affected ranchers, funded a 5-year environmental restoration program, and faced federal prosecution for their violations. Galton himself had disappeared back east, his reputation in ruins. The creek flowed clean and strong through the Rollins Ranch, bringing life back to land that had been dying. Cattle grew fat on good grass and abundant water. Other ranches recovered similarly, and the valley prospered in ways that honored the land rather than exploiting it. As October painted the aspens gold and the first snows dusted the mountain peaks, Marian realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. She waited another week to be certain, then went to Doc Morrison for confirmation. "You're pregnant, all right," he confirmed with a warm smile. "I'd say about 6 weeks along. Congratulations, Mrs. Rollins." She'd planned to wait until evening to tell Caleb, to make the announcement special. But when she arrived home and found him in the barn tending a mare who'd just foaled, she couldn't contain herself. "I'm pregnant," she blurted. He froze, then turns to her slowly, his expression cycling through shock to wonder to pure joy. "You're certain?" Doc Morrison confirmed it this afternoon. 6 weeks. She moved closer, taking his hands. "We're going to have a baby, Caleb." He let out a whoop that startled the horses and swept her into his arms, spinning her once before remembering himself and setting her down carefully. Sorry, should I not have done that? Are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" His sudden nervous fumbling made her laugh. "I'm fine. Pregnancy isn't an illness. Though you might want to prepare yourself, I'll probably be insufferable by the end." "You could never be insufferable." He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach with such tenderness it made her throat tight. "A baby. Our baby." That night they lay in bed talking about names and nursery arrangements and all the 1,000 details that came with preparing for a child. But beneath the practical planning ran a deeper current of emotion, gratitude for this new life they were creating together, wonder at how far they'd come from those first wary encounters, and love that had grown deeper than either of them had imagined possible. "Emily," Caleb said suddenly. "If it's a girl, could we name her Emily?" Marian thought of the sister she'd never met, the fierce young woman who'd died helping others, whose memory had brought Caleb and Marian together in the first place. "Yes, Emily for a girl. What about a boy?" "I was thinking maybe Thomas, after your father, since Emily honors mine." The gesture touched her deeply. She'd written her parents about her marriage, receiving a stiff but not unkind response that suggested they were slowly accepting her choices. Naming a child after her father would be a bridge between her old life and new. Thomas if it's a boy, Emily if it's a girl. Perfect. Winter came with its expected harshness, but the house Caleb had built proved snug and warm. Marian continued teaching through the early months of pregnancy, finally stepping down in March when her growing belly made moving between student desks difficult. The townspeople organized a celebration in her honor, presenting her with a beautiful quilt for the baby and promising to find a temporary teacher until she was ready to return. Spring arrived with its usual dramatic transformation, snowmelt swelling the creeks, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, newborn calves wobbling on uncertain legs. And on a warm afternoon in late April, with Margaret and Doc Morrison attending, Marian gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's determined expression. "Emily Margaret Rollins," Caleb whispered, holding his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "Welcome to the world, little one." Marian watched him cradle their child with such tenderness and awe, and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known possible. This was the adventure she'd been seeking all along. Not solitary exploration, but the profound journey of building a life and family with someone who saw her completely and loved her fiercely. Margaret stayed for 2 weeks helping with the baby, teaching Marian the skills her own mother had never passed on. The older woman's joy in her granddaughter was palpable and healing. She could honor Emily's memory while celebrating this new Emily's life. "She has your sister's spirit," Margaret told Caleb one evening, watching the baby sleep. "I can already see it. That determination, that fire. She's going to be remarkable." "She has her mother's spirit too," Caleb said, pulling Marian close, "which means she'll probably give us gray hair before she's 10. "Definitely," Marian agreed, but her smile was pure contentment. Summer returned, bringing with it the anniversary of the landslide that had nearly killed her and the victory over the mining company that had brought the community together. The valley had healed remarkably. The diverted creek now ran clear and strong. Vegetation had reclaimed damaged hillsides. Wildlife had returned to previously devastated areas. On a warm August evening, Marian and Caleb sat on their porch watching the sunset with baby Emily sleeping between them. The mountains blazed with alpenglow, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. The house that had been an empty frame a year ago now held the sounds and warmth of family. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Caleb asked, the question coming from nowhere. Marian considered it honestly. "I miss my parents sometimes. The easy access to books and culture. But miss the life I had there? No. Never." She looked at him, at their daughter, at the home they'd built. "This is what I was searching for without knowing it. Not escape from something, but arrival at something worth having." "And the adventures you wanted? Teaching and helping raise Emily won't leave much time for exploring mountain trails." "The greatest adventures aren't about what you see or where you go. They're about who you become and who you become it with." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I came west for adventure and found a cowboy's love instead. And loving you, building this life with you, has been a bigger adventure than anything I imagined in Boston." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I used to think adventure meant danger and excitement. Now I think it means having the courage to build something lasting, to love deeply, to face each new day knowing you've chosen exactly who you want beside you." Emily stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she'd wake soon for feeding. Marian lifted her daughter carefully, marveling as she always did at the weight and warmth of this tiny person they'd created. "Your mama came a long way to find us," Caleb told the baby, his voice soft with wonder. "All the way from Boston to this wild country, scared and stubborn and brave. And now here you are, the newest adventure of all." Emily's eyes opened, that unfocused newborn gaze that would sharpen into awareness in the coming weeks. Marian thought about all the things she'd teach this child, how to read not just books but the land itself, how to be strong without being hard, how to accept help without losing independence, how to love fiercely while remaining true to yourself. All the lessons Caleb had taught her, refined by experience and deepened by understanding. The sun touched the mountain peaks, and for a moment everything was touched with gold: the grass, the house, their faces, the baby in Marian's arms. It felt like a benediction, like the land itself was blessing this family and the life they'd built. "I love you," Marian said to Caleb, the words inadequate but necessary. "Thank you for finding me in those foothills, for not letting me face the world alone even when I insisted I wanted to, for teaching me that partnership doesn't diminish independence, it completes it. I love you too. Thank you for being brave enough to come west, brave enough to stay even when it got hard, brave enough to let me in." He kissed her softly, carefully, mindful of their sleeping daughter. "We're going to have a good life together, Marian. The three of us, and however many more children come along, here on this ranch with these mountains watching over us." "The best life," she agreed, and as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, Marian Rollins, former Boston schoolteacher, survivor of mountain lions and landslides, fighter of mining companies, and now wife and mother, understood that she'd finally found what she'd been seeking all along. She'd come west, seeking adventure and freedom, expecting to find them in solitude and independence. Instead, she'd discovered that the truest freedom was choosing who to love, and the greatest adventure was building a life with someone who made you more of yourself rather than less. She'd thought she needed to prove she could survive alone. Instead, she'd learned that real strength meant knowing when to accept help, when to offer it, and how to stand beside someone as an equal partner rather than a dependent or a loner. The West had tested her, challenged her, nearly killed her, but it had also given her everything that mattered: purpose in teaching, community in Pine Ridge, and love with a cowboy who'd seen her completely and loved her fiercely. Inside the house, the fire burned warm against the coming night. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to promises made and kept. And in between, on a porch overlooking a healed valley, a family settled into the quiet joy of ordinary evening, feeding a baby, planning tomorrow's work, existing in the profound contentment of having found exactly where they belonged. Marian had come west for adventure. She'd found a cowboy's love instead. And in the end, that love, with all its daily challenges and enduring rewards, proved to be the greatest adventure of all.